Hello, and welcome to this YouTube sermon. Uh, this message is to the millennials, my generation. Do you remember the first day your parents left you at home alone? I do. I don't remember the exact details of that day, but I do remember that my parents were pointing out that I was 12 years old now and that I should be responsible enough to take care of myself and my 10-year-old brother. I didn't really understand the logic as to why my age qualified me to take care of anyone, and I am absolutely sure that I was the crazier one of the two of us. My parents, however, didn't have a problem with that. They, number one, probably just wanted to finally get away from us. And number two, they probably thought that as long as I knew how to call 911 if anything bad happened, that we'd be just fine. To my parents, my age, or maybe for a better word, maturity and my knowledge qualified me to hold down the fort. I may have been young, but it made sense to give me some responsibility. However, it would not make sense for my parents to let me take care of my younger brother if he was in, say, critical condition. Right? I mean, that would be plain irresponsible. That is why doctors have to go through about 8 years of medical school. There are specific qualifications that one needs to administer that type of care. The Bible is similar in that it gives us specific guidelines, certain qualifications that leaders must exhibit in order to take care of the flock. Thus, today's subject is about the pastor. Go ahead and turn with me to 1 Timothy chapter 3. Now, while you turn to that page, I'm just going to fill y'all in on something. The different translations of the New Testament list a couple of different names for the pastor that basically mean the same thing. The term overseer, elder, bishop, presbyter, all describe the job description of a pastor. They essentially lead and care for the flock. So if you see it different in the version you're reading, just know that we are talking about the same thing. Okay? Verse 1. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into the snare of the devil. Now, this is a lot to go over. So, for those of you who desire to become a leader in the church body, I encourage you to go back and continue to review these qualifications so that you understand what is really expected of you. Now, what I'd like to focus on today is not the what or the how, but the why. Why must the pastor meet these qualifications, and why must he do what he does? First, his life must be above reproach. This means blameless. This means that he cannot be blamed for having lived a life of alleged immorality, past or present. He must not be. You must not be able to accuse him of teaching false doctrine. Basically, if people understand you to be shady, a liar, a cheat, a drunk, or adulterous, or teaching anything that could be contradictory to Christ, you're simply not qualified. I mean, how could a pastor ask the church to do something he's not even doing? And why would you follow someone who's not teaching correct doctrine? Now, second, he must be a husband of one wife. And at this point in time, polygamy was a common practice. So Paul is inferring that a pastor only have one wife, as opposed to having many. Some translate this as a husband being faithful to one wife. And if we look at this in the context of the whole, both 1 Timothy and Titus, we can see that God desires that we are faithful to one person, Him. 1 Corinthians 7:2 says, "But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband." Sexual immorality is a sin that many struggle with, and the fruit of this sin can lead a person from God and into darkness. We see in the story of Solomon that although he was one of the wisest men to live, he had many wives and was eventually led astray. 1 Kings 11:2-3 says, "King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Sidonians, and the Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, 'You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods.'" Solomon disobeyed God, and eventually God took away his great riches. So, how can a pastor be given to having other women aside from his own wife, or other beliefs aside from his own belief in God? How can he say to be faithful to God if he is not even faithful to his one wife? Number 3, the pastor must be sober-minded. This means that he must be one who follows good reason. He should not be controlled by his own passions. Prudent would be a good word to describe this characteristic. It shows a concern for the future, which means that this person will not be hasty in their actions, but wise, knowing that our current actions can have major effects on the future. This goes along with the next characteristic, which is self-control. The pastor is to exhibit a sober mind and self-control because the world is constantly enticing people to forget about tomorrow. The world has no hope for tomorrow, so they shout out that we should live for today. YOLO! You only live once, right? YOLO, said the man who died from driving drunk one night. YOLO, said the woman who slept with the guy only to wake up with an STD. YOLO, said the young man who decided to drop out of school to sell drugs to make money only to be thrown in jail for life. The pastor must have self-control over their minds and actions so that the church can have someone to look up to, someone who, despite the world's call to give in to their passions, still says no, not my will, but my Father's. Next, the pastor must be respectable. The most fitting description for this context is that he be a gentleman. He must not be unkempt or harsh or brutish in conversation. This means that if you want to lead, you have to take a shower. You have to brush your teeth, comb your hair, if you have any, and speak politely. If a pastor respects themselves, they will respect the church, and the church will in turn respect themselves and respect one another. Also, they must be hospitable. God commands us to be hospitable to those in need, Romans 12:13, and to be hospitable to strangers, Hebrews 13:2. This is the duty for all Christians, and so it is only right that the pastor do the same. He must also be able to teach. This should be obvious, but you must know that they must really love to learn and be ready, because this life is just so vastly dynamic, and there are just so many questions that the pastor will encounter. Thus, he must love to learn so that he is able to teach. He should not be a drunkard. How can a pastor tell anyone to control themselves or abstain from loose living if he himself is guilty of it? Next, he must not be violent. This may be connected to the caution concerning the consumption of alcohol, because drunkenness often leads to uncontrollable passions, which sometimes lead to an uncontrollable rage. The pastor must not be quarrelsome, period. He must be gentle in his nature and peaceable. Among the chaos within his life and the lives of the church body, the pastor must do his very best to keep the peace. And lastly, he must not love money. Many say that money is the root of all evil, but no, it is the love of money that is the root of all kinds of evil. The pastor must be aware of the danger of the lust of money and power. Jesus was tempted by the devil with material things, but Jesus understood what loving those things meant. This is why he responded, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Therefore, the pastor must not serve money, but serve God alone. By doing this, he will show that godliness with contentment is great gain, and thereby strengthen the faith of the church. So if you aspire to be a leader of the church, know that it is a high calling, one that requires a lot of dying to oneself. The position superficially seems glorifying, but God judges the heart. Jesus is always going to be the prime example to follow. So if you are truly following him and you want to be a leader, you will eventually qualify to lead. This is one of the many parts being a pastor. Excuse me. This is one of the many parts of the one body that makes up the Church of Christ. All parts, however, are important and essential, and if anyone desires to be the greatest, they must be like Jesus. And this is what he said to his disciples. He said, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But it is not this way with you. But the one who is the greatest among you must become like the youngest, and the leader like the servant. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table, or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am with you as the one who serves." Jesus is the king, and yet he serves. So at the very heart of anything we do, whether it's pastoring, teaching, ushering, worshiping, giving, prophesying, whatever it is, we must do it with a heart of love and service. There is no other way that can contend with that.